Hello, this episode is going to be so helpful if you're confused around changes in your gut. Everything from bloating, gas, constipation, digestive issues, especially if they start appearing in perimenopausal years. Maybe you're noticing some changes and you're above 35. So in the conversation, we really talk about what happens, what's really changing in the body that we really need to know about, and most importantly, some very clear practical steps that you can take to support your gut health that aren't just all about supplements and spending loads of money. So I love this episode. I hope you absolutely love it too. Enjoy. Today I am joined by Roslyn Kent, a registered holistic nutritionist and founder of Plants First Nutrition. She works with women whose gut health has changed after their mid-30s, where bloating, constipation and sluggish digestion don't respond to fibre, probiotics or doing more, quote unquote. In this conversation we're going to break down why gut issues at this stage are rarely just about food, and how stress, nervous system load and pace of life directly affect digestion. Roslyn, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. This is going to be such a great conversation because before we started the podcast, you were like, my jam is constipation. And I was like, great, because so much women do speak about this, but as you know, it's not something that people voice and they kind of just ignore it because it's a topic they're nearly embarrassed to talk about. But it's extremely common, especially, I suppose, from your perspective. When does constipation really become a problem? Do you have clients that are in a certain age category that notice it more, or what's actually happening in the female body that happens more often than people would like?
Yeah, that's a really great question because I think a lot of people don't realize, how, like you said, how common constipation is, but it's more common among women, or at least that's what's reported. We don't know if men just aren't reporting it or what's happening there, but there's obviously many factors that set women up for, well, I don't want to say success, but you know what I mean, when it comes to developing constipation or because they're more prone. So on average, a woman's colon is 10 centimeters longer. So that is something that people don't know. And of course, the longer your colon is, the longer your transit time is going to be. Hormones play a massive role. So the stage of life I see a lot of women coming to me at is around like the age that they're developing perimenopause, or they're going through perimenopause and going through menopause. And of course, because your estrogen, progesterone is dropping significantly, changes in hormones are going to play a role there. So that's a really common thing that I see. And then, of course, stress, the mental load. Women are expected to take on a lot. We're expected to raise children, but also work now. Things have changed in terms of our role in society. So we're no longer just raising children, we're also working, raising kids. Like there's so much involved there. So like you specialize in, we're talking stress, nervous system dysregulation, we're talking the mental load, all of that is going to play a significant role in increasing the chances that gut health issues are going to develop, dysbiosis is going to develop, and nervous system dysregulation goes hand in hand. They can't be separated. So yeah, lots there.
And going back to the word dysbiosis, and I think we hear that more and more now. Just let's talk about that for a second and the connection to, and I see it a lot, as people, go beyond their 30s, they're noticing the gut changes are way more prevalent, especially around dysbiosis, SIBO, leaky gut. So we could first, I suppose, discuss that really briefly and then go from there.
Yeah, so dysbiosis is just essentially negative changes in gut bacteria. And it's hard to say for sure because there's no like real population studies or things like that on why in their 30s women are starting to experience more of these issues and why their gut health is changing for, the worse, so to speak. But a lot of it has to do with stress, with the nervous system, absolutely, and also with changes in diet. So many of us grow up eating a certain way, and then perhaps, in our 20s and 30s, we change our diet, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, but we're going through a lot of life changes in our 20s and 30s, especially when we hit 30, perhaps we're having kids and, going through big life changes, and so that's going to disrupt any stress, and big life changes or just all of that is going to disrupt your nervous system, and your nervous system goes hand in hand. So of course stress is going to create negative changes in gut bacteria, but when you're going through stress, whether it's acute or chronic, but more so we're talking like chronic low grade stress, that is absolutely going to change the profile of your microbiome, and it's also going to delay gastric emptying, so we're talking slowed motility in the upper GI tract, and then that is also going to cause spasming in the colon, and there's lots of different like little things that go on when you're dealing with stress for a long time, but also, of course, acute stress and specific situations where you're dealing with that. And so spasming in the colon and also tightening of all of the muscles. So pelvic floor muscles are going to tighten usually, and it just inhibits your ability to fully empty. So there's the microbiome piece, and then there's the structural pieces that accompany that. But yeah, I think in your 30s, there's lots of stuff going on in our lives, and so again, hand in hand with
Yeah.
that nervous system connection.
It's funny when you look at, someone that's in their 30s, and you're right, life changes so much that there's added stresses. And I feel like people are finally beginning to demand change in that area. Like, I think for like a good few decades now, they were like, oh yeah, okay, just more stress. Come on, we'll go back to work and we'll do kids and we'll mind our parents. And people were, the marketing then of probiotics shot up, and the marketing of all the, the quick fix, quote unquote, gut health tricks went up, without looking just like systematically at, hold on a second, women's lives have really changed. There's so many, stressors like thrown on the fire. And it's so funny, like society in general, it's almost like we've been trained to say, right, what's the quickest top line thing I can do that's going to fix this? And you're like, oh, just eat a kiwi, just have a bit of chia seeds, drink more water. It's so simple, like, why are you complaining about this? But obviously, when we think about the word constipation, we think about tightening up, stress, tension, and that's obviously such a huge part of it. But people straight away go to, let's eat an enormous amount of fibre. And of course, the fibre part is so important, and we'll get to your name in a moment around plants, but I think it's just so important to stop and acknowledge for a minute, if you have constipation or dysbiosis and a lot of different gut issues, like the first thing we should be looking at is what can we remove from our lives in terms of the stress perspective. I assume that's like way bigger than we acknowledge, but also, as I always say, that's the messier work. So again, to fix our gut, we're looking straight to the probiotic, and the probiotic industry is absolutely booming. So yeah, I would love to discuss that with you. First of all, your name and why that's the name you chose for your business, because I think that says a lot. And also the order, we've probably got the order wrong of how to go about gut health. And I'd love to hear the correct order from you, because I've had so many clients that have come to me after with gut health coaches, and they did the, you know what I'm going to say. They did the elimination. They did, improving their diet, but then they didn't do reintroduction, or they didn't do nervous system regulation. And like the puzzle was incomplete for gut health. So yeah, lots there. But if we first go with the name, and then we go with the actual order we should be approaching our gut with.
Yeah. So before I talk about that, I just wanted to say, to your point, that's actually one of the biggest reasons why people don't get results is they're not looking at the foundations of their life and the fact that those need to change. They're looking at all the periphery and all the little things that they could add in, the colostrum, the probiotics. No one wants to do the dirty work, the hard work, no one wants to do it. It's hard stuff, and you actually have to overhaul a lot of things. I'm not saying you need to overhaul your entire life, but you need to really get down, dig deep, and think, okay, what actually needs to change about the multiple ways in which I am living my life on a daily basis. And also people aren't willing to habit stack. So they're willing to add in a kiwi, add in a cheese, but they're not willing, okay, should I start with the foundations of my diet and work out from there and then add on all these other habits? That's the biggest reason people, when they come to me, they're like, I'm actually seeing results because we're adding on all these layers. We're not just picking one thing, cherry picking one thing and adding it in. Anyway,
I think that's the beauty though of working with someone like you, that there's every solution on the planet in terms of, you can Google it, ChatGPT it, whatever way you want to get it. You're going to get a multitude of information. But when you look at it as generic information, you're just throwing a load of random things and hoping for the best, rather than doing it in a systematic way, which we'll talk about.
Yeah. So my business name is Plants First Nutrition. It actually started out as But First Plants, which I ended up rebranding. Terrible. I was just in university when I started that name. Anyways, so Plants First Nutrition. The idea behind that is that plants should be the first or the main focus of your diet. That doesn't mean you need to be eating a 100% plant-based diet. Most of the women I work with are eating 60, 40, 80, 20. It really just depends on the person. My goal is that they're finding a balance where they're increasing their fiber, yes, and we'll talk about the order because that's really important, but plant diversity, fiber, these are all focal points. And so it's more about what can you add in versus, what can we take away, because everyone's so focused on the elimination part of things. And you get sucked into a really deep, dark rabbit hole, because that's actually not going to fix your gut health. That is not going to repair the dysbiosis and the intestinal permeability in the long term. It actually worsens gut health. So when you go down the route of low FODMAP diet, elimination diets like autoimmune protocol or whatever, and they have their time and place, absolutely. I'm not saying that you should never do one, but none of my clients, I was going to say most, but none of my clients follow elimination diets underneath my supervision, because that doesn't actually solve solve things. It just worsens gut health outcomes. The more diverse your diet is, the more resilient and diverse your microbiome will be. What you feed will flourish, and we want to increase the numbers of bacteria and diversity of bacteria in our gut. And so we need to expand our diet, not contract it. And so an elimination diet can tell you, hey, like these foods I'm sensitive to, but it doesn't actually fix things in the long term. It just weakens your gut health if you follow it long term. So, plants first nutrition. I was about to say protein first. That's funny. Plants first nutrition is just like an emphasis on adding in fiber, adding in plant diversity.
Yes.
It's the addition of things, addition of plants. And let's talk about the order, because that's really important. So most people, they'll go to their doctor, their GI doctor usually, or their family doctor, and the doctor will say, hey, you've got constipation, let's get you on Miralax, or it's called Macrogol, Movicol, or Restoralax, depending on where you live. It's all the same thing. That's kind of the gold standard laxative that they recommend. They'll put you on psyllium husk or Metamucil, which is essentially the same thing. And I have problems with that for a number of reasons, and I can discuss that in a bit. But they'll put you on that, so a fiber supplement, and if you're lucky, they'll tell you to start changing your diet, but most practitioners will not. They'll just put you on the fiber supplement, maybe they'll put you on a probiotic, and they'll send you on your merry way, and you're gonna be like, well, how do I take this laxative? And they're gonna be like, oh, just take it as needed. So the problem is when you go to your doctor, you're probably already quite backed up. You might have stopped having bowel movements at some point, and so that's when you recognize constipation, but really the constipation started a long time ago, probably. Or maybe you've been dealing with it most of your life, but you're probably a lot more backed up than you think you are. Because if you're not fully emptying every single day, meaning if you're not eliminating in full all of the stool that was produced or formed from the day prior in full that next morning, then you are backed up and constipated by definition. So let's say I have breakfast, lunch, and dinner on Monday, and all 3 meals are fiber rich, and I end up with a healthy volume stool as a result that's sitting in my colon throughout the day. The next morning, I want to be eliminating all of that stool. And yes, it can be spaced out in up to 3 bowel movements throughout the day. But by the end of the day, you want to be fully emptied. You don't want to be dealing with that backed up stool. So if you only eliminate roughly 60 to 80, let's say 80% of that stool formed from Monday on Tuesday morning, then you have 20% still sitting in your colon. And if you repeat that 5 days in a row, you have a full day's worth of stool sitting in your colon, ready to be eliminated, but it has nowhere to go. And so it's releasing methane gas. Backed up stool releases a lot of methane gas. And so that's going to lead to trapped gas in time, because stool is going to trap gas between those pieces. It makes it harder to eliminate. And so when you add in the laxative, that's a good place to start, but the problem is you're taking it as needed. So most people are only taking it on the days where they're missing bowel movements, when really if they're not fully emptying most days, then they're constipated most days. They're probably dealing with a long transit time, meaning a long time for food to move through their system from ingestion to elimination, or just lots of backed up stool, long transit time. They're dealing with, lots of backed up stool that's just sitting there releasing methane gas, and methane gas actually makes constipation worse. So it's a vicious cycle. So backed up stool releases methane, methane makes constipation worse. So
that is so interesting. There's so many parts there.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh my goodness, lots of words. So it's brutal. Yeah.
The connection there with, as you were saying, like the female colon slightly longer, also thinking of, I was just thinking there straight away, like majority of people are sitting on a toilet, which isn't the right design to actually fully eliminate everything out of you anyway. So majority of people are dealing with the extra methane gas because they're not fully emptying every day. So probably like a huge percentage of people are constipated. And obviously you don't know, because it's a subject people aren't talking about. I can freely talk about poo because I have 5-year-olds and they're just obsessed with it.
I love that.
The other day they have a step and they call it their poo step. And like a neighbor called in and they were like, Mom, where's my poo step? And I was like, okay. But just very, very useful.
You're normalizing it for them. And that's amazing, because that's kids who grow up not having poop talk normalized are the ones who often end up dealing with these issues, and they don't do anything about it because they're ashamed to talk about bowel movement and poop.
Oh no, they can give you a tutorial. They're like, you need to have your knees higher up, because they were actually, if we were in the wild, we'd be squatting on the ground doing a poo.
I love
so
that.
But if you think about that from an adult perspective, think about I always think about the position of your body. Mm-hmm. Of course, people aren't fully eliminating when
that's part of
that's
it.
One of the best positions. Yeah, and then the other part you said, psyllium husk is like everyone's just like, you're sorted if you take that. And it's just so interesting because of the gel-like thing. If you're not hydrated enough, it's just getting stuck. And there's multiple other reasons why it's not like the only solution, that along with your kiwis and chia seeds and the different types of fibre. So yeah, there was a lot of things I want to circle back to, but maybe if we start with the psyllium husks piece, because I know everyone is just like, I'll just take them and I'll be fine.
Yeah. So this ties into the conversation about motility agents, which is essentially the term that I use to describe any supplement, medication, herb, or laxative, essentially, that predictably gets your bowels in a rhythm. So everyone thinks laxative and they think, ooh, bad. And technically Miralax and all of that is a laxative, but you could consider something like magnesium citrate a laxative as well. Yeah. So let's say you're taking Miralax, let's just go with that idea, or Macrogol or Movicol or whatever you want to call it. You're taking it as needed. And then you add in psyllium husks. So psyllium has some insoluble fiber in there. It has a lot of soluble fiber, but it also has some insoluble fiber. So it's not a pure soluble fiber supplement, or fiber supplement. So when I'm working with clients, soluble fiber tends to work a lot better for constipation. A lot of people think it's the opposite because it's a lot more gentle and it's going to help improve bowel movement frequency, and it's going to act as a prebiotic. So it's going to help with hydrating stool a little bit too. But the problem with when you add in something like psyllium and you're super backed up, because it has some insoluble fiber in there, that's going to add bulk to stool. We don't want to add bulk to stool when it's kind of like a rake, but it doesn't work well if things aren't moving. And so anytime you add a fiber supplement, or if you add a lot of dietary fiber even, into a backed up colon, it's actually just going to bind things up even further. And so that's an issue. You need to get things moving. And so that's where I talk about motility agents a lot. So you want to start getting your bowels in a rhythm. You want to be working to establish that daily rhythm and start getting things moving. So a lot of people do need to do a clear out, whereby they're actually clearing out the backed up stool in their colon using a strategic one-time higher dose of a laxative to clear things out. And then from there, you want to start taking that motility agent daily, usually something osmotic or even a stool softener. So something like magnesium citrate works really, really well. That's what I use most commonly. So it's going to draw water into the bowels, and it's going to make having a bowel movement easier. It's going to allow stool to pass easier. And then once you get things moving, you can absolutely add in a fiber supplement, but I don't recommend starting there. I usually recommend starting with dietary fiber and starting to change your diet by removing or reducing some of the foods that slow down motility and increasing the foods that improve motility slowly, but surely over time, so you don't cause more backup or slow things down. So it's a bit of a dance, it's a bit of a game. You want to get things moving first. So rhythm is the name of the game, daily motion and daily bowel movements, because once your bowels are in a rhythm, the fiber's not going to slow things down like it is when you're backed up. If you add fiber to a backed up system, fiber is fermented. It's a great thing because the fermentation process via your gut microbes releases short chain fatty acids. Those are going to help heal the gut lining. They're going to help reduce food sensitivities, improve mood, yada, yada, yada. There's so many benefits to them. But the fermentation process also releases gas. So if there's gas being released into a backed up system, we already talked about this, gas makes constipation worse. So we don't want to be fueling that cycle when you're already quite backed up. So adding in fiber right away, or a fiber supplement right away when you're backed up and dealing with a long transit time, that's not the time. The time is when you get things moving, when you do that clear out and then start taking your daily motility agent, daily, safe, low dose of a motility agent to predictably get your bowels moving. And then from there, that's where fiber is going to help keep things moving. So a lot of people think, fiber gets things moving. No, it keeps things moving and it repairs your gut over time, but it's not going to magically unclog your system, so to speak. And neither will water, actually. That's hydration is so important when it comes to constipation, but water is not going to increasing your water intake is not going to magically get things moving. It will keep things moving. So yes, you do want to increase hydration, but don't expect it to get things moving. That's where the osmotic motility agent use comes into play. That's where doing the clear out and then continuing on with your daily rhythm with your motility agent use and then changing your diet. It all has to kind of come together. So to summarize, it's clear out if needed, if your transit time is over 36 hours. And by the way, if you want to test your transit time, just eat a half cup of corn at your next dinner time meal. You're always measured from dinner. And you want to see that in the toilet the next morning. If you don't, you see it the next day or 3, 4, 5 days later, you know that your transit time is longer than ideal. But if your transit time is over 36 hours, that's fair play to potentially do a clear out to get rid of all that backed up stool. And then you're going to add in your daily motility agent to keep things moving. And then from there, that's where, once you establish that rhythm, that's where you're going to start to add in that fiber. And down the line, absolutely a fiber supplement. But psyllium's not, the first one I choose. I go for like acacia gum or partially hydrolyzed guar gum. Those are pure soluble fiber supplements that tend to work better. So that's my rant.
Yeah, I love it, love it. I'm really interested in initially when you said you don't do elimination diets per se. You're more about, that's what I say with my clients. We do additional nutrition. We're looking to add nutrients, not take away anything. So is your mindset around, and your protocol around that, where you're adding additional nutrition so that your gut is getting fed enough so you are able to digest the foods you once weren't able to digest?
Yes and no. Okay, so the problem with food sensitivities, and mostly I'm talking about plant food sensitivities. So most of the time, that's what we're discussing. It's like beans and legumes and
lentils, and you're like,
So I truly believe that when it comes to plant food sensitivities, that's not necessarily the case. It's more so that when you're backed up, so this is kind of one side of it. When you're backed up, food sensitivities go through the roof because of that fermentation process, like I just discussed. The gas being released, it's going to make you feel horrendous when you're backed up. Food sensitivities almost become non-specific at that point when you're really backed up, because everything seems to set you off. People see, like, certain foods are going to make it more, like, they're going to make your symptoms worse than others. So you might be especially sensitive to chickpeas and other legumes, and you're like, oh, I can't eat these, I'm super sensitive to them. It's not that you're necessarily sensitive to them, it's just you're really backed up. And so the fermentation process is releasing gas, the gas is making you bloated. Because you're dealing with a lot of backup, there's trapped gas, and so it feels crampy and painful. But also, when you're dealing with dysbiosis, when you're dealing with poor gut health, you're going to struggle to digest certain types of fiber found in certain types of foods. And so the more resilient and strong your gut is, the easier time you're going to have digesting all kinds of plant foods. But you can't just expect to add in a 6-bean chili to your diet when you've never eaten beans before and be able to break that down and not have any symptoms. It's called sloppy processing, and your gut is going to have weak spots if it's damaged. And so you need to rebuild the health of your microbiome. You need to rebuild the certain populations, all kinds of populations of bacteria that are proficient at breaking down different kinds of fiber. So certain types of bacteria break down certain types of fiber. If you cut something out, you're going to starve off those bacteria. They're going to diminish in numbers, and then if you add that food back in, it's like you have to teach your gut again. Your gut has to relearn and build up those bacteria again to be able to digest and break down the fiber found in those plant foods. So it's not that it's necessarily food sensitivities, it's more a weak spot where your gut just can't break down the fiber found in those foods. So that's more so what I'm dealing with. I'm not talking about, like, let's say non-celiac gluten sensitivity with extraintestinal symptoms. So that's like that 1% of the population where they're not celiac, but they're dealing with really, really intense reactions to gluten-containing foods. That's really not what I'm talking about here. That's a very separate issue, and there are real food sensitivities where someone's potentially, they're not able to digest something for other reasons. But when we're talking about digestion, microbiome health, and just intestinal symptoms like bloating, gas, constipation, that's a microbiome issue. That's not necessarily, we're not talking about the immune system. Allergies are different. This is a digestion issue. This is a microbiome and bacteria breaking down fiber issue.
That's a good point to make that specific. What really interests me about everything you're saying is that all the misconceptions around all of this and the nuance of, I think when people go to approach this, like I know the marketing here for probiotics, I sometimes get the leaflets of, what probiotic strain is suitable for whatever symptom you have. And I think there's just such a mindset of like, let's just throw a probiotic in, let's just eat more fiber and hope for the best. And then it's like, hold on a second, if we look at this from, bird's eye view, what is causing this in the first place? Yes, we have the nutrition piece, but also there's so much more to deal with: the gut-brain axis, to deal with the nervous system, to look at that probably is the root cause more so than other pieces that we put more emphasis on because they're a cleaner solution. Food is a cleaner solution, changing your diet, than the deeper regulation work and fully understanding the gut-brain axis and the bidirectional nature of it. And I think I always think it's so interesting when we think about so much serotonin is in the gut, and also how much we need a more regulated nervous system to have good gut health and good digestion. And I think we can so easily forget about that, because when you go to most health practitioners, they will go straight to nutrition. So of course we think we should go straight to nutrition because the expert said it. But
Yeah.
I would imagine for you, the root cause of a lot of these for women you deal with is the stress piece and the chronic stress
Oh
piece.
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that was the biggest piece of my puzzle. Don't get me wrong, like diet played a massive role for me, and it
Yeah.
does for a lot of my clients. It usually goes hand in hand, but the nervous system, I don't know. There's a lot of women I work with that they mirror my own upbringing in terms of like we're often, we're worried. I grew up like a really worried kid, and I was constantly stressed, never regulated, and it just kind of carried through the rest of my life. And I see that a lot in the women that I'm working with. They're the type of women that they just want to do well at life, and they're perfectionists, or they're worriers, and they're trying to do it all. And the type of environment we live in, the society we live in, the Western world, it's like we're go go go. We're never sitting down and relaxing and eating meals. We're always on our phone. We're expected to work 8 hours and then come home and then cook dinner and clean up and do all the things. It's a byproduct of the way we live our lives, and it is absolutely a component for like 99% of women that I work with. And for most women, it's absolutely, it's the core focus, and they forget that. So yes, we focus a lot on nutrition, but I also focus a lot on the habits that are going to help regulate their nervous system, and they go hand in hand. You can't piece them apart.
You can't step just like that going to a nutritionist. You cannot just go to a nutritionist for the food piece. They have to tell you how to implement the food. And for one woman to implement the food, you might need to go to the nervous system stuff. You might need to go to the mindset, So, and I think when we look at nervous system regulation, again, just like we do with nutrition, we go to the quick fix straight away. We're like, okay, just do more meditation, just do more EFT tapping. And it's like, hold on, this is really messy work. Again, it's messy work where you actually have to deal with your tendency to rush, your self-critical thoughts. There's so many little pieces to having a regulated nervous system. And again, when we try to oversimplify by taking the probiotic and just doing a bit of deep breathing, we miss that this is like a lifelong thing, that we're always needing to do the next step. And as I said to my clients all the time, I'm like, it's never ending. It's so exciting.
Yeah.
You're never finish this, because every chapter is bringing a different stressor into your life. Like when you first have kids, when your kids are teenagers, before that, when you're building your career, when you get into perimenopause, postmenopause. So it's like you're continuously having to find new ways to regulate for your scenario and continuously challenge your thoughts, which can be causing the dysregulation in the first place. So like, I think just like understanding that for me makes so much sense, because also regulation is blood sugar balance. It is gut health. It's all totally connected.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you can be eating the best diet in the world, but if your nervous system is dysregulated, you're not digesting your food properly. And I think people forget this, and it's just, it makes me, like you just were talking about, it makes me so frustrated that we're not able to slow down enough in our lives to even recognize that this is a component. And that's such a huge problem. Like I grew up, just for an example, like I already said, I grew up a worried kid and all that stuff, but in university, I actually started changing my diet, and I started eating plant-based. And that was, something that was supposed to really help me. And at the time, I didn't know, I wasn't following a perfect diet, but I was adding in all these things that I tell my clients to add in. But I was working a job I hated. I was commuting an hour each way to a corporate office. I hated my job. I was always crying, always stressed. I was doing HIIT workouts at 5 a.m., 5 days a week. I wasn't sleeping. And my gut health was the worst could have ever been, because all of that was my norm, yet I was eating, lots of fiber, but it didn't matter. Like your gut health is one component when we talk about like digestion, but your nervous system drives the ship. When you are in a constant chronic state of fight or flight, your nervous system takes over your gut, and that automatic programming that is, your gut's normally operating on its own seamlessly, but your nervous system completely takes over when you are in that state of fight or flight, when you're activating your sympathetic nervous system. And so digestion becomes sloppy, gas production ramps up because, food's just not getting digested properly. Like we already talked about, spasming of the colon, mucus being added to the colon, and we're talking about constriction of muscles and constriction of the colon. People ask me all the time, why are my bowel movements really skinny, snake-like? Sometimes it can be a really serious issue like an obstruction, but a lot of the times it's just your colon is constricting and narrowing because of the chronic stress that you're dealing with, because of whatever you're dealing with that's activating your nervous system, and that is constricting your colon enough that your bowel movements are becoming skinny. So there's a lot that I speak on with that, but yeah, no, I 100% agree. It's the foundation for so many women, and they're ignoring it because it's a lifestyle change. It's an everyday lifestyle change where you literally have to change the way you're showing up, and yeah, it's difficult. It's not easy. It's the hard
Yeah,
work.
that's so true. And I think, like everything, like we say, when you oversimplify something that isn't overly simple, it can then become this mountain to climb, because as the more you get into anything, like the more you know, that nearly the harder it gets, because you're realizing there's a next step. But kind of knowing in advance, like there is pieces of this that are, yeah, bigger work than we thought, is kind of helpful in a way, because you're preempting that regulation is coming from many different areas. And that gut brain axis part, I think people are beginning to understand that more. Like your anxiety is affected by what's happening in your gut is affected by what's happening in your thoughts, and everything is really connected. Like, and I've seen so many times that I see that client a lot. So like kind of type A, but very meticulous with all the routines they do in the morning, the night, the nutrition, the meal prep, everything's done really well. And I was such a worrier as a child and a teenager, very much lost that over time, but really would have got like ulcers. I would have really been a worried child. And it's really interesting how, when you, like, I would have loads of issues then, but the gut issues then really dissipate when you're more regulated. But also, I do a lot of work on regulation, a lot of mindset work and a lot of different tools and finding different somatics. But yeah, I think it's anyone listening that's like, this is never ending. Like, I'm having gut issues for decades. But when you really change the perspective that I'm not just looking for the probiotic and a few regulation tools, when you go all in, then that's probably when you see big change, because you do have to really change your life, like to changes in your environment, changes of the people around you, changes of job, like drastic
Your
changes
thoughts,
sometimes can
your
happen.
beliefs. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. All your thoughts and
huge
beliefs.
one.
Yeah. And when you have a client and they are trying a lot of solutions, but they're still like chronically constipated, what are the usual things that are down the list, that they've done all the basics, like they've changed the nutrition, they're doing a bit more regulation work, they're getting their sleep better? What are like the things that we don't preempt that sometimes you're seeing?
Yeah, so as a nutritionist, obviously I'm limited in terms of what I can help them with, but oftentimes I see things that I can recognize for them that they're like, oh, I didn't think about that. And then they go to their doctor and they work with them more closely on it. So I would say thyroid issues are a huge one, especially
Yeah.
Hashimoto's. Huge
Yeah.
one. And then also pelvic floor dysfunction. I'd say like 1 in 5 women I work with have pelvic floor dysfunction,
Wow.
especially if they've had kids, but also not necessarily, you don't need to necessarily have had kids to have pelvic floor dysfunction. So if your pelvic floor muscles are too weak or too tight, then that's going to inhibit your ability to fully empty. Like the stool can be there waiting to be released, and your muscles in your colon can be working properly to try and expel that. But if the pelvic floor muscles are not opening up properly, or allowing that stool to be released properly, then that's a big problem. And also we talked about the squatty potty stool that can help a little bit, but if you have pelvic floor issues, then yeah. So there's prolapses and rectoceles where the stool can end up being like lodged into like a pocket it's essentially a pocket that's kind of protruding into the vaginal area. So the stool can get stuck there instead, and so a rectocele would need to often be structurally addressed through surgery. And then pelvic floor muscles need to be addressed, of course, through a pelvic floor PT or a gynecologist or someone who can address that and diagnose that. Like I said, thyroid issues. And a lot of times people will add in, this is something like more diet related for sure, but people will add in a lot of fiber, but they're not addressing the foods that are slowing things down. So that's something that I see that's a little bit that's not talked about a lot is they're like, I'm eating this much fiber, I'm eating a lot of fiber, or they're eating quote unquote a clean diet, but they're not necessarily eating a motility supporting diet or adding in enough of the foods that are going to improve their motility, or they're eating too many of the foods that are going to slow down motility. So those are kind of the top things that I see. There's of course other imbalances like electrolyte imbalances, not something I see very often, but that can be playing a role, like low potassium and low magnesium, of course, can absolutely cause constipation. But I would say the biggest culprit, other than those things, is always going to be the nervous system. They're like, I'm eating well, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And then I'm like, hey, you're drinking 4 cups of coffee a day. You're not sitting down. You're rushing through lunch. You're eating food on the go. You're working out 5 days a week in the morning. You're doing HIIT workouts. It's that classic case of they don't want to change their lifestyle. They're willing to change their diet and their supplements, but they're not willing to change how they're living their life. So like you already, alluded to, that's a massive, massive piece of it for a lot of women I work with.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually, because if you're still having the lifestyle of, a lot of hit, maybe a lot of rushing, overthinking, self-criticizing, continuously doing that, all the additional things you're doing with nutrition, with extra nervous system regulation tools, somatic work, don't necessarily make much change, because you have to let them things work and set up the environment for them to work. And that's such an amazing point, that actually you have to do a big overhaul of changes to allow these great things you're doing to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost say it like, if you think about your gut, like I already mentioned, it's operating on its own seamlessly, normally, hand in hand with the enteric nervous system, which is your second brain. It's your gut's nervous system. That's kind of like the mayor running things for, a city, and things are operating normally. And then all of a sudden you go through this chronic stress period. So it's going to be like a more prolonged low-grade chronic stress, usually for a lot of women. The local authorities are going to be told from higher up what to do. And so things locally kind of just stop operating the way they normally do. And then the higher up power, so the prime minister, let's say, is going to tell you exactly what's going on. So your nervous system, your central nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord, that is the higher authority. Let's say that's the prime minister. It's going to overhaul operations happening locally. And so until that stressful event is over, you're going to see huge changes in your digestion. Like I already said, delayed gastric emptying, all that stuff is going on. And so until that stressful period, until that crisis or emergency, as your brain and body perceives it to be, is over, then you're going to have that higher up authority telling your gut what to do. And so digestion changes are inevitable at that point. So you could be eating a high fiber, 50-gram fiber day diet, and you could be eating all the plant diversity, doing all the things, but that food's not digested properly, it's not eliminated properly, and you're experiencing lots of negative changes in your gut health, like dysbiosis we're talking, fueling the growth of pathogenic bacteria. That's all going on until that stressful event has concluded. And even after the stressful event has concluded, it can take about 4 hours or so for digestion to return to normal, which is crazy.
Yeah, and that's if somebody has a fairly regulated nervous system, that they're able to bounce back actually to rest and digest.
Absolutely.
You can be stuck in that stress mode for weeks, days, weeks, if you're not able to go back to that rest and digest. And I think that's really interesting when I think of, being in a parasympathetic state even, and you're in rest and digest mode and you're calm enough to digest your food and also absorb the nutrients. And I think about, the stereotypical life of a lot of women. Like you say, you're rushing the meal all day. You've a big to-do list and the mind is racing. And, the body feels a little bit under threat because of the pace of life. And then, of course, regardless of the diet, you're not even absorbing the nutrients effectively. So
absolutely,
it's like going back to basics. I'm doing all this work to eat my probiotics. Like I have kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi in my fridge. I'm eating a spoon of it every day. But hold on a second, is this actually benefiting me? Am I slowing down enough to eat my meals and to regulate so that I can digest these nutrients properly? So it's like, I think that line of questioning yourself today, for anyone that's listening and they're thinking, hold on a second, I'm ticking the box here. I'm doing my movement each day, which is really important for your gut. I'm sleeping really well, again, really important, because all them things are also influencing thyroid. But also I'm thinking, hold on, am I creating an environment of, around the regulation and all the other pieces that are going to allow food to be digested properly? So I think like even just questioning yourself around that, you'll straight away be like, okay, there's some red flags. I'm staying up quite late scrolling. That's creating more of a stress load, impacting my sleep negatively. That's going to impact my appetite the next day. It's going to impact my mood. Like there's probably a cascade of effects from little habits you do each day. Like, I think the tendency to scroll throughout the day as well really dysregulates us more than we think, because I
Absolutely.
heard something really interesting actually. It continuously interrupts your thought pattern. Okay. So over time, it's like time is shrunk because your memory processing is impacted. So
Wow.
all day when you're, continuously interrupting yourself by checking a notification, you're never getting that full line of processing. So even like for me, I was thinking, emotional processing. Are you actually fully connecting in a conversation, or is your mind waiting for the sound of the notification? So
That's so
that's a
interesting.
separate thing, but really interesting how the data isn't there yet to show us how much this is impacting our cognitive function, our long-term memory. Are we actually shortening our time on this earth because what's happening to our brain when we're constantly being interrupted? That's a very
Yeah.
deep question, actually. I'm not ready to go into, but it's just
Oh,
really interesting to think about.
totally. And it's funny you were saying, like, yeah, that piece of people don't recognize that all these little habits contribute to that. Like, when I ask my clients, hey, like, do you consider yourself a stressed out person? Like, are you dealing with a lot of stress? How's your nervous system? They're like, no, I'm pretty good. Like, like you said, like, I meditate, I do yoga, I do this, that. And then I'm like, hey, would you consider yourself like an anxious, worried person? Do you worry a lot? And like, how's your day structured? Like, I'm asking them about their day. And then when we really dive into it, they are ticking off all of those boxes of like, hey, this person's nervous system is not very regulated. So we perceive stress, when we think about stress, most people just think, oh, like, I'm not fighting with my husband every day. I'm not dealing with a financial crisis. We think about the classic stressors, like work isn't that stressful. But then we dive deeper, and they're the type of person that's literally go, 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 go all day. They can barely take a breath. And then finally at the end of the day, they're like, oh, and they sit down to eat their first meal. And it's like, I think you might be a little more stressed and more dysregulated than you think you are.
But actually, that's actually like an amazing thing to think about, because I'd say so much more people are actually saying to themselves, I'm not a stressed person. Exactly like you said, because life
Totally.
doesn't present as stress from the outset. Like, I have friends that have, like have a great partner. They don't have kids yet, so there's not the extra like busyness of kids. They're pretty content with their career, right? So on the outside look like a really successful life, but would really struggle with anxiety and feel rushed all the time and negatively think about themselves. That is just as stressful. It doesn't mean because your externals don't look overly stressful, you can still deeply internally feel stressful, but also if it's not psychological, your body is stressed if because of the food you eat, because the type of exercise you do might be incompatible with where you're at. And there's lots of different stressors that way go beyond the stereotypical ones we think about. So like that person you said, like she's doing her meditation in the morning, in the afternoon she's doing her breath work, at the nighttime she has this beautiful wind down routine. But what's happening in between each of them things is more significant than them lovely things she's doing each day. So like, if we're going to do it, we may as well do it right and go all in.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I have clients that their gut health and their constipation is the number one stressor in their life, and they recognize it, but they don't realize how much it's the cycle, right? So, like I already said, all those different the cascade of events that happens when you're stressed out, that's going to make you more constipated. But they are so hyper focused on their bowel movements and whether or not they're going to poop and what their bowel movements
Yeah.
are like, and oh, that one day something was a little bit off. And I'm not discounting the fact that it's a stressful journey for a lot of people, but it's the hyperfixation on being perfect and having perfect bowel movements and having perfect gut health and never experiencing even an ounce of bloating. And so that type A personality, where it's the perfectionist tendencies, that's me, was me
Yeah.
for many years. I've had to learn to let go of a lot of things. I see that a lot with women I work with, and it's a big, big contributor of their dysregulated nervous system, and it just feeds the
Yeah.
cycle even further. So.
I'm going to be really nosy because I'm really curious now after you said that. What does your day look like? Even a segment of your day in terms of how you marry this all together. Like, if somebody asked me what I do in a day, from when I wake up, the breath work I do, to the lymphatic drainage I do, to the type of meals I eat. And if you could go through that, that would be so helpful, because so much things and by the way, I was vegan for like 13 years and I was
Oh
still
yeah,
predominantly eat a lot of plant-based food. So
awesome.
I'm really behind like really having a plant-based diet and really understanding all the benefits of that. But I would love to hear from your perspective of like really being an expert in all this. what are you doing? And everyone listening, like, even if you're 10 steps behind, it's like thinking, okay, can I gradually work towards this or adopt one or two things from this? I think that's really helpful to think about it like that. And probably like thinking of the simple things are the most important foundational things.
Yeah, so believe it or not, like I used to focus, this is going to sound really non-traditional in the sense of like focusing on nervous system and gut health and all that. I used to be really regimented with my routine, and I've had to step back a lot from that, and that has actually been the biggest regulator for my nervous system, believe
I
it or
love
not.
that. Oh my God, I love that. People are so
Yeah,
understanding that. Take away
yeah,
some of the to-do list.
and exactly. So I've actually simplified. So my main focus for my nervous system is actually just slowing down. So that is the main focus and the main theme of my life now is I've actually released a lot of that, like step by step, here's what I need to do. I've changed my entire work schedule. So I used to work in corporate, now I work for myself, of course, and I literally work, I don't know, 5 hours a day usually. And so there's a lot more time for me. So I would say in terms of what I do, like a big focus is of course my diet, but sleep is a huge thing. So most people probably assume she probably wakes up at 5 a.m. and goes to the gym and yada yada. I do go to the gym sometimes because I want to be strong. And I've actually just recently incorporated that back, and it's a really big social thing for me too. So that's a
Yeah.
nervous system
Especially when you
regulator.
work for yourself.
Yeah. So I wake up usually around 7 and I let myself sleep in if I'm tired. Like this weekend, I was working outside in the yard, kind of trying to clean up the yard in the house that we just bought. And it was physically intense labor. This morning I didn't actually let myself sleep in because I had this podcast. And that's okay. But tomorrow I'm going to let myself sleep in. So sleep is a huge, huge, huge focus for me, more so than getting up early to meditate or do any of that. So sleep for sure. And then I'm a matcha drinker. I don't drink coffee. It is too agitating for me. I cannot handle the spike in cortisol and all of that. So big matcha drinker, and I used to rush into having breakfast, and oftentimes my body wasn't ready for it, and so I would try and eat breakfast and I just wasn't hungry, and I think that oftentimes my body just needs time to wake up. But I eat breakfast whenever I'm hungry, around like 9 o'clock usually. And then I have something balanced. So fiber rich, we're talking for blood sugar balance. Yes, it's going to be protein rich usually, but fiber is actually one of the best things for balancing blood sugar. So fiber rich breakfast, usually like oatmeal or something that's loaded up with all kinds of things. And it's always going to be plant-based because I am plant-based, but big focus on fiber there. And before that, sorry, I was going to say I relax and I drink my matcha. And so one of the things I focus on with my clients is working on bowel retraining, where it just means like you're working to stimulate that urge to go through relaxing and drinking warm fluids in the morning. That helps trigger your gastrocolic reflex. So I actually make space in the morning for whatever. Sometimes that's journaling, sometimes that's, whatever it is. It just depends. Time to relax in the morning. So there's usually a little bit of time there. And then I have my bowel movement, and then that's after I eat my breakfast. I work, like I said, around 5 hours a day at most. So throughout the day, though, I go for a walk outside in nature. I live in British Columbia in Canada, and I am surrounded by some of the most beautiful forests ever. So I spend about an hour a day walking outside in trails. So sometimes I go to the gym, like I said, in the morning, but every single day I go on I call it a daily motility walk. I have a dog, so that helps, but that is the best thing for my nervous system, and the best thing for motility too, and better bowel movements. A lot of people think they need to adopt this really, really intense workout routine. Honestly, get your butt outside into nature if possible and go for a walk. Yeah, I would say outdoor spaces are the most regulating for me. And that's a big thing that I've changed, is that because my work schedule allows me to get out midday, expose my eyeballs to daylight, which a lot of people don't do. Like we're spending 90% of our time inside. So I'll go for a midday walk, and then I wrap up my work and do whatever. I'm just trying to think. And then dinner is, again, fiber rich, same with lunch. And I eat around 50 grams of fiber a day. And so lots of antioxidant rich foods, lots of plant diversity. And then wind down in the evening. I'm usually, oftentimes I'll read before bed, I'll journal before bed, but nothing crazy. I'm not actually a big meditator, so you'd be surprised to hear that. Meditation is not my jam. I love the Wim Hof method, where there's structured breathing to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. I like that kind of thing, and oftentimes I will do that. But just traditional meditation, my mind tends to wander just based on the type of person I am. But I'm a go to bed early type of person. I wind down with a cup of my ginger juice. There's a recipe I have. People can DM me the word ginger on Instagram if they want it. Ginger is really, really good for a number of different things, for motility and anti-nausea, antispasmodic, all that stuff. So something calming, and oftentimes that's fennel or peppermint, something good for digestion. And I wind down with a cup of tea, and yeah, I'm a granny. I go to bed at like 9 o'clock. So
that's so nice to hear that, though. The importance of actually training yourself over time to go slower about your daily activities and doing things with intention rather than rushing things. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Roslyn. I'm so interested in so many of the pieces you talked about today, especially that last bit was so helpful to just hear your day, because I think, like you say, a lot of people that are type A, though, may almost stress themselves out by having to do all the wellness hacks and routines. So like paring it down and stripping it down is really important. Okay, tell us where people can find you, because I'm sure this resonated with lots.
Yeah, so on Instagram, I am Plants First Nutrition. And then you can find me, my website is plantsfirst.ca, and I'm trying to think, those are kind of the main places. I'm also on TikTok, Plants First Nutrition, same handle. But that's kind of the main place I hang out online on social. So you can find me there. And yeah, I have a membership, and I have a small group program, and I have workshops. So there's plenty of ways to work with me. And then I also have digital guides for, on how to do a clear out and the best motility agent brands. So there's definitely different options and different tiers in terms of things that they can invest in if they're interested. But give me a follow, and yeah, there's lots of information, a lot more than what we discussed today, specifically on constipation. So if you're someone who is backed up, you suspect you have a long transit time, you've been dealing with this for a long time, your doctor's not helping, and you just want additional insights, then give me a follow. I share lots of free information, and then you can join my newsletter if you wanted to. So yeah.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Roslyn. So great to chat.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Really, thanks so much.
So one of the biggest themes in this podcast episode was nervous system regulation in terms of supporting your gut health as we age. So I have put the cortisol regulation toolkit in the show notes. It gives you clear, actionable steps and follow along videos in order to start nervous system regulation. That is in the show notes, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please share with a friend if you found it helpful, and I'll see you soon.